Hello, welcome to my little trip down road testing memory lane Q&A video today. So thanks very much for sending in all your questions and comments. They're hugely appreciated and very entertaining. I've been on my travels, just come back from the NEC Motorcycle Live in Birmingham, which was great. It was really good to see such a busy show, loads and loads of people and loads of new bikes. I mean, a few years ago during lockdown we thought bike shows might be a thing of the past, but it was absolutely buzzing. It was fantastic atmosphere, loads of new bikes for 2024. I mean, loads. It's going to be a busy launch season for us, which is good. And thanks for all the people that came to say hello when I was wandering about and manning the MCN stand, which also had some really cool bikes on it. And there's the MCN show coming up at XL in February as well, so that's going to be worth a visit. It's going to be bigger and better than ever. But the highlights of the show for me were undoubtedly the Yamaha XSR 900 GP. I really like the look of that. Really like the idea of a kind of a comfortable sports bike with a bit of character, which that looks like it might have based on a new MT-09, so I'd be really interested to ride that. I like the riding position. Even though the bike was bolted down on the stand, the riding position felt pretty comfortable, which ticks a lot of boxes for me, and I'm sure old sports bike riders everywhere else. I like the naked version that they had, so the GP had the Marlboro colour paint job. Not as Lumo yellow as real Marlboro orange, but you can't have a real Lumo production bike because the paint fades, but it's pretty bright. And I really like the naked one that looked like the original Power Valve colours, the N1 I think, something like that. And talking of Power Valves, Velocity Moto had their bike there, and they're based on XSRs as well, and he's got like must be an F2 Power Valve replica, which is absolutely fantastic. So yeah, really good bike show, really enjoyed it, and yeah, thanks for everybody who came to say hello. Well, let's crack on with some questions, shall we? First one is from Andrew Serick, I'm sure. Hey Neezy, would love to hear your thoughts on the ideal amount of power for a street bike. I wanted an MT10 for so long and shortly realised after riding it I could never use the power on public roads. What's your opinion on the sweet spot? Well, thanks very much for your question. That's really interesting question actually. Yeah, big powerful bikes are good fun. They pull massive wheelies, and the MT10 is probably one of the most fun super nakeds to ride. But in terms of a sweet spot for power on the road, I suppose it depends on what you're going to use the bike for. If you want to go out for like a short, sharp, intense, fun blast, a smaller engine bike is much more fun because you can use more of the bike. So I would say like a middleweight naked is probably the sweet spot. Something between 110 and 130 bhp, give or take each way, is probably the most fun. It's, you know, bikes of that capacity are light, they're agile, they're involving because you can rev the engines. And a lot of these modern middleweight nakeds handle superbly as well. I mean, the KTM 890 Ducar is just incredible. It's one of the best handling road bikes out there. It's got a beautiful front end. We tested it a few years ago. Had Michelin Cup 2 tyres on, really sticky tyres, really great front end. And in actual fact, you know, when you go abroad to Europe and you sort of go to biker haunts and biker twisty roads where, you know, the locals mess around, you'll see them more on bikes like that than big super nakeds. So MT9 SP is really good fun. The Monster SP is good fun. Street Triple. So I'd kind of say those bikes are the sweet spot. If you go smaller, you can have more fun, but then they stop being kind of practical everyday road bikes. So I would say that's my sweet spot in terms of pure unadulterated fun. But sometimes a bigger engine is better if you want to be a little bit lazier, if you don't really want to rev a bike all the time. Having the torque and lazy revs is more fun. It gives you fun in a different way. You know, if you're touring, you kind of want big cubes so you can sit in top gear and you can just roll on and off the throttle and use the grunt from the engine. And if you want to do big, leery, high-speed wheelies, you want a big bike. But yeah, I'd say for pure fun, a smaller bike, a middleweight naked is probably the best, and that extends to sports bikes as well. You know, screaming a 600 is much more fun than 1,000 on the road. Probably a GSX-R 750, my old favourite, is probably the best balance of capacity, of fun and handling and involvement. Yeah, I'd say those kind of 750, 800, 900 capacity bikes are the most fun. That's definitely the sweet spot for me. But no, great question. Next, from Squizerka. Thanks a ton, Neevesy, for answering all these interesting questions. It's becoming a real encyclopedia of all things two wheels. Thank you very much. Track bike question. I own a 2014 899 Panigale and use it only for track riding. If you had the choice and to maximise track riding enjoyment, would you rather spend money to upgrade this current bike, starting with suspension for example, or simply get a newer Panigale V2? This question, of course, can be replicated for any older bike that has a new counterpart. Thanks. That's a really good question, actually. I'd say for your bike specifically, for 2014 899 Panigale, I would spend my money on upgrades, on suspension, brakes, tyres. I mean, you don't really need a lot more than that. The Panigale 899 didn't really change too much when it turned into a 959, and then it didn't really change that much when it turned into a V2. It's still fundamentally the same bike. And when you kind of strip them down for the track, they become even more similar. So I would say a well sorted 899 Panigale with nice suspension and brakes and tyres would be better than a standard new Panigale V2. And that kind of goes the same for most bikes, really. You know, I think we've said a lot on these videos how modern motorcycles are built down to a price. So as soon as you start upgrading all the nice bits, all the chassis parts, exhaust and all the rest of it, you absolutely transform that bike into something that a standard road bike could never be. So yeah, something that's well sorted is going to be better than a newer standard bike. But the Panigale is a great track bike. I've had some of my best track rides on the Panigale. I remember the launch of the 959 at Valencia was particularly good fun, and the V2 around Jerez as well. But I've never ridden a Panigale with proper suspension, etc. I'd love to, and if you go that route, you'll have to let me know. And obviously there's a lot of knowledge out there because of the one make racing class for the little Panigale as well. So you should be able to get a lot, because they're quite quirky bikes to get handling properly, quite unique bikes to ride. They kind of got quite a heavy feel, quite short revving. So yeah, you need to know what you're doing when it comes to setup as well as throwing suspension at it. But there's plenty of people out there that will help. So yeah, great question. Thank you very much. Next is from Grotty Quacks. Thank you for these videos, Neevesy. I'm a new rider and I'm learning loads here. Oh, that's good. Thanks very much. After a year of my CBR 500R, I'm thinking of going down the two bike route. Lucky you. I'll get something along the lines of an Interceptor 650 for one of them. For the other, I'd like a more focused sports bike. I really like the power and speed of my 500. I love smashing into the limiter and using everything the bike has. So therefore, I don't think I'd enjoy a proper 600 on the road. However, the road biased sports bikes like the R7 and ZX4R are quite expensive still. Would a 22 RC390 still be exciting enough? It looks like it could be the answer, but I'm worried that the little single will not be fun. I do intend to do some track days. I think SV650 would be perfect, but they're getting on a bit now. Well, that's a really good question. Well, that's a good idea, having a two bike garage, one kind of a laid back retro like an Interceptor 650, which is really a really good bike, handles superbly. Royal Enfields now are created by lots of former Triumph engineers and test riders, so they've got that really nice, easy to ride, well balanced handling characteristic, just spot on Royal Enfields, and really good value as well. They've won a lot of MCN awards along the way, and deservedly so. So that's that bike ticked off. In terms of the other sort of more focused sports bike, if you went with an RC390 KTM, I would say it is a very, very similar riding experience to the Honda. It's a little bit sharper, a little bit faster steering, and it does feel a little bit sportier, but it's essentially a very similar performance. And in actual fact, I'd say the Honda is better. It's a little bit kind of longer legged, it's a little bit easier to ride. We did a group test a few years ago at an Italian track called Levante, and we actually did a fun 3-hour endurance race on A2 sports bikes, which you can find on MCN's YouTube channel. And the long and short of it was the Honda, we rode them on the road as well, ended up coming out top. So you've kind of got that bike that you're looking for already. And I've also mentioned before that one of the best launches I've ever done, one of the most memorable ones, was riding the CB500 range in the Canaries a few years ago. And the Honda CBR 500R was amazing for the reasons you describe, because you can use every ounce of the bike, you're banging it against the rev limiter, you're going fast, but it's not too edgy. But if you wanted to go away from that, yeah, an SV650, that's a really good shout. Yes, they're getting on a little bit now, but they're still great bikes, bulletproof engines, and there's a lot of racing parts out there because they're racing super twins, no, mini twins championships. Super twins are a little bit higher spec, but Bemsy and MRO all did mini twins championships. So, you know, if you put a decent rear shock, some fork internals on an SV, bit of different gearing, you could really transform that into an absolute cracker of a road bike and track bike. If you wanted to scream the living daylights out of a bike, you could maybe go down a 400 route, but a little bit older, something like a ZXR 400 or FZR 400 or something like that. But bear in mind that those bikes are going to be very old, and they're going to have worn head race bearings, worn swing arm bearings, worn suspension. So, you know, maybe you're not going to get the experience you want without spending a lot of money. Or a little bit of a wild card I've written down is, and it's not a fared sports bike, but a KTM Duke 690, single cylinder, really revvy, really exciting, massive fun without being too fast. But that's more of a sit up and beg bike rather than a full-on sports bike. But basically, I think you've got the bike you want with your CBR 500R. I mean, maybe spend the money on a few nice little upgrades. Maybe get the suspension sorted. But again, it doesn't really need it. There's nothing wrong with the handling. Put some nice tyres on. That's probably all I'd do. Just get some nice sticky sports tyres and enjoy thrashing the hell out of it. But great question. Thanks very much. Next is from Max Spain. Hi Nevesy, my name's Joshua. I've followed your content as far back as 2007 when I was 16 years old. After all these years, I'd definitely like to ask you a question. Well, thanks very much. And thanks for watching all that time. What's your favourite handling sports bike pre-2000? I had a GSXR 750 98 S-Rad, and that was a dream to handle. My partner scraped her legs with leathers through country lanes. Furthest I ever saw the Spanish asphalt was without falling off was with that bike. Thank you. A great question. Well, thanks very much for watching since 2007. Well, that's not long after we first started doing videos for MCN. I think it's 2006, 2007. I mean, there weren't many motorcycle YouTubers out there. We were kind of there towards the beginning. We didn't really have any reference or people to kind of learn from. We kind of just did it all ourselves. Me and Chad and Howard Boylan, who was our photographer at the time, did a little bit of video, and we kind of just messed about with it for those first few years until we started to find our feet and started running with it. And now videos are an integral part of what we do. But it's nice to see you've been watching all that time. Right, so favourite handling sports bike pre-2000. I don't know if your question is just a bit of fun, or if you're actually thinking of getting a pre-2000 sports bike. If you are, then like I said in the previous comment, the handling of an older bike is very much dependent on condition. Like a well looked after, not so good handling bike is going to be better than a badly looked after good handling bike, if you know what I mean. So if you are going to go pre-2000 for your sports bike, just get something in really nice condition, and that's going to handle, and you'll be able to use it more as it was intended. If it's a little bit rough around the edges or a little bit worn, it's never going to handle that well. But I've written a few down of what I think some of the best pre-2000 handling bikes, and probably I've only scratched the surface. So if anyone wants to put in their claim of what the best handling pre-2000 bike is, be my guest. But of kind of the ones I've ridden and I've really been impressed with, OW01 Yamaha and the R7 that followed, fantastic handling. RC30, you can't argue with that, can you? RC30's just won so many races. I got to ride some RC30s recently at Donington, standard one and 2 race ones, and actually a Suzuka 8-hour factory one. Number one, they're really, really small. Number two, they're not actually that fast by today's standards, but they handle incredibly. So that's a great handling bike. And kind of coming a little bit more affordable and attainable, the S-Rad, as you say, is probably one of the nicest handling 750s of the era. If you go a little bit before that, you've kind of got the big kind of jelly mold GSX-Rs, which didn't handle so well. You've got the ZXR 750, that was a fine handling machine. MV Agusta F4 750, beautiful handling, a little bit heavy and a little bit asthmatic by today's standards, but the handling was absolutely spot on. And sticking with that same designer, Tamburini, you've got the 916, and that handles superbly. The 888s handle really well. Obviously with those bikes, it depends on the kind of, back in those bad old Ducati days, you could have similar bikes coming out the factory with different components on, depending on, the parts availability at the time. So you might have got a good handling Ducati or a bad handling Ducati. But the bike that really, or the bikes, or the genre that really stands out for me really is kind of the best pre-2000. So the best kind of 90s handling bikes have got to be the 2-stroke 250s and inline 4-stroke 400s. I mean, they handled beautifully because they were so light and because their engines didn't make too much power and they didn't have too much torque. Because the bigger super bikes of the days, they probably had a little bit too much power for their chassis, which is why companies like Bimota were always so special, because they made exotic chassis to let the engines work properly. But with a 250 2-stroke, like an RGV 250, TZR 250, KR1S, they're the ones we got in the UK, and then the Japanese NSR 250s, all those incredible 250s just handled incredibly for the tyres that were available at the day as well. So remember, back in the day, tyre technology wasn't anywhere near what it is now. So yeah, those 250s and 400s really hit the sweet spot. I remember I had a couple of RGV 250s, one that I raced, which just handled beautifully, wasn't that fast, and the one which I ended up smashing myself to pieces on the road, which is an RGV 250N, and I had some X-Race Dunlop's racing tyres on that, and it was just, I managed to, there was a feature in performance bikes of someone getting their elbow down, so I decided one day to strap a Coke can to my elbow on my leathers. This would have been 93, I think. Duct taped it to my leathers, and I got my elbow down around some roundabouts in Ramsgate. I mean, it just felt unstickable. It was absolutely incredible. So yeah, I would say those 250s and 400s are probably my favourite handling bikes. But that's a really great question. Thank you very much. And finally, from Murray Trimmer. Hi Michael, thanks for the videos, no problem. I see an RX-7 Harada on your shelf. It was. It's down there, I'll show you in a minute. I wanted one of those, but here in New Zealand the Harada graphics didn't come out on the RX-7. Fortunately, back in the day, Arai was a very user-friendly company, and for no extra cost they put the Harada graphics on an RX-7 for me. I had to wait for approximately 3 months for it to arrive. Did you have to get yours custom made, or were they available in the UK? Well, great question. I love crash helmets, and the Harada crash helmet, when that came out, 92 or 93, well, Harada was racing, and I think one of the reasons we might be so misty-eyed about those old days is because we weren't saturated with information about everything, because there was no social media or internet, and you know, you would get your biking fix from magazines and newspapers, and you know, especially PB of the day, you know, they used to be quite sporty, used to show a lot of racing, and they used to have these beautiful colour pictures of the racers, and then when Harada was racing, you know, I remember seeing this crash helmet for the first time and thinking, wow, that is amazing, that is the best crash helmet I've ever seen. And I eventually bought one. This is actually my second one. The first one I was wearing when I had this big bike accident and smashed it to pieces. So I got another one, which I never actually wore again, because little did I know that when I recovered from my bike crash in 1994, I physically couldn't ride again for 6 years because I dropped foot. So I couldn't use the gears. But this is the Quantum, so this isn't actually an RX-7. So an RX-7 is one of these, which is the Arai with the scoopy bits on top. And again, these didn't really come out, I don't think, to the public until kind of the late 90s. They were available for racers before then, and you used to see a lot of journalists wear them. And again, I remember looking at the magazines and, you know, just looking at the shape of the Arais that we were wearing, and I'd see the journalists, you know, Mark Forsyth, Simon Hargreaves, wearing these RX-7s and being absolutely as jealous as hell. And when I started riding again in 2000, I got myself the newer Harada replica, which was available in an RX-7. But yeah, I'm actually quite jealous that you got Arai to create your own RX-7. I'd actually love one myself. But yeah, hasn't got the scoops, unfortunately. But yeah, I do like a crash helmet. But yeah, that's a great question. Thanks very much. Anyway, that's it for this time. Thanks very much for watching. Keep all those questions and comments coming in, and I'll see you again very soon.